I've always marveled at this Japanese gardens, right, or gardens. So what comes to your mind when you see a Japanese garden or what they call a Zen garden? Well, of course, there's some slight differentiation. They typically say a Zen garden is basically just rocks and sands and pebbles, right? But basically, we talk about a Japanese garden. So what are the key characteristics? Okay, so in a typical garden, all right, you got a couple of things. I think may not all representative, right? Like for example, rocks, right? You see rocks. Now, what does rocks symbolize? What can we learn from rocks, right? I think from the Buddhist perspective, when we talk about rocks, it represents stability, right? Stability in the midst of change, right? And these are very important Buddhist terms, right? So when you see rocks, you always find rocks in gardens. And then you find leaves, all right? For example, Japan, like many temperate lands, they have got 4 seasons, all right? So if you go in spring, then you find cherry blossoms, which is like the beginning of life. Then in maybe in summer, then you find what's the other flower? Oranges, is it? How do you pronounce that? And then when it comes to autumn, you find that the leaves start falling. All right, is again representing that's the change, the impermanence. And then when it comes to winter, you find plum blossoms, right? Plum blossoms. So you can even see within the 4 seasons in a temperate land, all right, that things change. And sometimes the least that you expect, all right? Like we always have this image that if it's spring, then there's, if you are in temperate land, if it's spring, then you have flowers, it's not snowing. But a couple of weeks ago, I was in the US, so we are in a place in Wyoming, and it was in May, and it was snowing. Right? So how do you explain that? All right, so it was snowing in Wyoming in May. All right, so what about the Buddhist lesson is that the importance of letting go, that things it just takes its course. It's just the flow, all right? And you see ponds, and sometimes in a typical Japanese garden, you see streams, and then you find a bridge over it. So that streams actually also tells us like a flow of life. Like a river, like the Buddhism we say is you never step into a river twice, because it's always changing. All right. So again, our life is just like the water that flows in the streams. Right. So again, we can learn a lot of stuff there. All right. And then you have got flowers, you got plants. All right. I talk about spring, and then about plum blossom, cherry blossoms. But there's a very unique, you can call it flower or plant that called the lotus. Right? You also find that in many gardens. And where does the lotus actually comes from? It actually comes from the bottom of some murky, dirty place, isn't it? But the moment the lotus blooms, once it's above the water, then it flowers and it blooms. All right? It's beautiful, beautiful a sight to behold. All right? So again, that's why the lotus has got a very important significance in Buddhism. All right? It is said that when we are as long as we are not enlightened, we don't learn enough of the Dhamma, we don't practice enough. We are like the lotus under the ground, right? Dirty and murky. But the moment we understand, we have right views, right thoughts, and we practice, then we just come above the water, and we become like the lotus, right? So, like the Buddha, for example, is regarded. That's why you find images, especially in Chinese Buddhism, the Buddhas or even Guan Yin always sitting on a petal of lotuses, right? So above that. So all these things reminds us, and of course, fruits, abundance. So when you have so much abundance, we should learn to be forgiving. We learn to have gratitude. So there's a lot of things actually we can learn from nature itself, right? So this just by introduction, when we look at. So the next time when you go to Kyoto, when you besides shopping, right, you can visit the Zen gardens, right, and you find that we should reflect on it, okay. But basically, there are 2 or 3 key elements in a typical Japanese garden. I think the first one is harmony, isn't it? Right? If you look at the rocks, you look at the flowers, you look at the streams. So it gives you a sense of peace and harmony, all right? You feel very at peace, isn't it? Okay, that's the whole purpose of it. Okay, now, so what do you mean by nature, right? So we're talking about learning from nature. Of course, we mean nature to like plants, like animals, like rocks, like forests, and the weather and even the geology, all right, of the earth. So it often means that environment or the wilderness. And then, although humans are part of nature, human activities are often described as at times at odds or outright separate or even superior to nature. Now, that may not be absolutely true as far as Buddhist concept of the worldview is about. You have heard of this word called the Protestant ethics. Have you heard of the word called Protestant ethics? This concept of Protestant ethics, like in the West, they believe that man was created to dominate nature. All right, so that's the concept of what is called Protestant ethics. You've heard it for the first time, you can Google what that means, okay? So, but in Buddhism or in Asian philosophies, man is not there to dominate nature. All right? Even if you look at Chinese, typical Chinese landscape painting, the most common one, you find the landscape painting, you find mountains, you find rivers, and then somewhere you will look very closely, you see a very tiny figure of a man maybe fishing there. Right? So the man or the person is not significant, but it's the environment, it's the nature itself. All right? So that's very different from European paintings, right? Or whether it's Impressionist painting or Post-Impressionist painting, you find that the central is always the person. Okay? So there's a subtle way of worldviews in terms of how Eastern philosophies or Eastern religions like Buddhism looks at nature. So we don't believe that we should dominate nature. We should be part and parcel of nature. All right? So, and nature, we sometimes have a very, shall I say, very naive view of nature. We think nature is always beautiful, always pretty, very wonderful. We always think of nature, the sunset, and very beautiful. Well, it is true, but nature can also be very fierce. All right? If you have watched the National Geographic magazines, if sometimes you watch some YouTube channels, you find that it's the survival of the fittest, isn't it? All right, you find survival of the fittest. The small animals get eaten up by the big animals. All right, so that's the nature of existence, and that's samsara actually. So when you watch these videos about big animals eating small animals, that's actually samsara. All right, there's so much suffering even in nature itself. That's why the Buddha says the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is actually about dukkha, unsatisfactoriness of nature. But people say, Buddhism is very pessimistic, it only talks about dukkha. But the Buddha actually is just telling us the facts of life. But he did not stop at that, isn't it? Did he stop at that? He just said, everything is suffering, so too bad you're all suffering. No, he didn't. All right? If that has been his only mission, then I think societies like BAPS wouldn't have been set up. Because organizations like BAPS or any other Buddhist organizations is to utilize what the Buddha, or to optimize what the Buddha had said, and then to find what did he actually recommend that we can overcome our suffering or unsatisfactory, find peace and happiness. Okay? So we should not just look at the first noble truth, we should always look at the other three. This is called the Four Noble Truths. Okay? So, that is nature, all right? So it's got its beauty, it has got its unpleasant side, the ugly side of it. So it's got both sides of it. And that's very much like life. Life is all about that, all right? So in Chinese ecosystem, they talk about the yin and the yang, isn't it, right? So similarly, you find that we talk about that. Now, if you look at the Buddha himself, the life story of the Buddha itself is an epitome of what you live in accordance with nature. Now, I just take you through, for example, the Buddha advocates a simple, gentle, and non-aggressive attitude towards nature. And reverence for all forms of nature must be cultivated. All right? So if you have gone on Buddhist pilgrimages, all right, you go to Sarnath, the place where he gave his first teaching. First thing you see will be plenty of deer all over the place, right? Okay, deer. So in other words, you are actually at peace with animals, all right? All right, but if you have not been there, you've been to Nara in Japan, then also you get a deer park. So you find a lot of deer, they're at peace at you. All right. So the Buddha used examples from nature to teach. So in his stories, the plant and animal worlds are treated as part of our inheritance, even as part of ourselves. All right. And if you understand the law of karma, all right? Because of our deeds, because of actions, we can be reborn into any of the 31 planes of existence, or the 6 worlds, 6 realms. And one of it is the animal realm. So we are actually part and parcel of this whole ecosystem, man and animals. We are no different, okay? Now you look at the Buddha's life itself, all right? When the Buddha, at age 29, he left his palace life to seek liberation. He spent most of his remaining, not 51, to be 30, living in the forest, right, until he passed away, okay? He passed away, age 80, right? So he lived in the forest, he lived in the woodlands, he lived in the parks of northern India, right? So that's, we know it's a historical fact. But of course, legends say, the Buddha also flew to Burma, the Buddha also flew to Sri Lanka. That we do not know, right? But that's not important. What is important is that when the Buddha was alive, he actually lived in the forest, in the parks, in the woodlands. And these are natural settings. And actually, these natural settings are the incubator for all his awakening and his teachings. All right, someday you like in the first, where did he give his first teaching? The Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta at Sarnath, in the deer park at Sarnath, right? You see, so he gave it at these places. And the Buddha's great awakening of Bodhi at the age of 35 occurred. He sat meditating outdoors under a tree. So he sat meditating under a fig tree, right? So he didn't stay in the house, close up, in his room and get enlightened. He actually got enlightened seated under a tree. It's actually a fig tree. But because he sat under the tree and became enlightened, that tree became called the Bodhi tree. Right? So Buddhists call it the Bodhi tree. And today, universally, it's accepted. But it's actually a fig tree, isn't it? So I think there's even a scientific name, Ficus religiosa. So they call it the religious fig tree. Because there's Buddha sat under that. All right? Okay, so, and then after his awakening, it is said that he spends, 7 days gazing in gratitude at the tree, right? He sheltered him in his final quest for liberation. So the distinction, the separation between man and nature becomes blur. Because here the Buddha is paying gratitude to a tree, because the tree protected him. All right, and I think in other stories, which maybe your children will be able to tell you in Sunday school, right, during the heavy rain, and then even a giant snake called Mukhalinda came and sheltered the Buddha, the giant snake, the Nagas, Mukhalinda. Now, whether you believe that or you do not believe that, I think that's not so important. But the point is, even an animal like a snake, a giant snake, came and actually gave protection. So again, the separation between man and nature is blurred, right? So there's no great distinction there. So the Bodhi tree does symbolize the Buddha's awakening and his connection with the natural world. Then where did the Buddha pass away? He passed away in a quiet, forested area in Kushinara, isn't it? Between 2 sal trees, S-A-L, 2 sal trees, okay? So again, this is a very powerful image of living and dying in harmony with nature. So here you find that here was one man who lived 2,600 years ago that Buddhists around the world venerate as the enlightened one. So his life was very much in accordance with nature. Right? So nowhere did you find the Buddha say we should dominate nature, man should control nature. So man lived in peace and harmony with nature. Right? So today, modern representations like Zen gardens, so it's actually a microscopic representation of how man should live with nature. Okay? So from the Buddha's life itself, from the time he was born, and then his search for enlightenment, he was in the forest, right? And then he got enlightened under the tree. He gave his first teachings at the deer park, a lot of animals there. And finally he passed away. Right? Between 2 sal trees. He chose to die between 2 sal trees. Right? Okay? So all this thing tells us the importance of nature. Now, again, if you look at the Buddhist teachings, right, many of the Buddhist teachings, there are a lot of metaphors that we can gather from nature. I'll just pick a few of it, all right? You have heard of this saying that growing in spiritual practice is like the rising sun dispelling the darkness of night. All right, so again, the sun, using the sun as an analogy. All right, in one of the discourses, the Buddha says, just as the sun is the forerunner of dawn, of morning, right views, samadhi, is a forerunner of all our practice. All right? You heard of that saying, isn't it? So in other words, the Buddha uses the analogy of the rising sun, right? Because the sun rises every morning. So he uses the analogy of which is the most important. When you wake up, you need the sun. You don't have the sun, you can't even see, right? So in our practice, what is most important? The Eightfold Path. And Eightfold Path is the first of the Eightfold Paths is right views, right understanding. Okay? So we must not underplay the importance of right understanding. Right understanding means that we need to understand the Buddha's teachings before we even can talk about practicing it, isn't it? So yesterday I was at another Dhamma center and someone was telling me that they've been told that it's not important to practice things like dana, not so important, just only meditate. It's good enough, right? Because life is short. So they asked me, is that correct? Right? But I said, well, that's not wrong, but I think that's incomplete. Right? Of course, meditation is important. Nobody denies that, but it's incomplete if you say we should only meditate and do nothing else. Because if that's the case, the Buddha would have given us twofold path, not eightfold path, right? Then Buddha would only say, well, you just need to have right concentration and right mindfulness. But did the Buddha give us that? He gave us eightfold path. In other words, he tells us we must have right understanding, we must have right thoughts, we must have right action. That's why this morning you recited the precepts. You see, the problem, I travel to the West very frequently, and I've come across many people who practice meditation. Even in the last session where I had with some of my senior leaders in Phoenix, there are people who told me, oh, meditation is great, mindfulness meditation. But when I asked them, but do you supplement it with morality, with ethics? Oh, that's religion, so that's not important. So they left out the part of ethics. So they only want to concentrate on meditation. So of course I said that's good, you have peace of mind, it's very good. But the whole Buddhist teachings is actually not just about that. It's about right understanding, right thoughts. That's why the Buddha says the forerunner, just as the sun is the forerunner of dawn, right views, right understanding is the forerunner of our practice. So we must always remember eightfold path, not twofold path or threefold path, right? Or onefold path. Some even say, no need to practice concentration, just mindfulness is enough, right? And I think, who was it? Sayadaw Tijaniya, right? He wrote a book called Mindfulness is Not Enough. All right? Mindfulness is very important, but it's not enough, isn't it? Even in the Satipatthana Sutta, all right, we find that there are four things. You must have atapi, you must be ardent, have right efforts, and then you have satima, you have mindfulness, but it must always be balanced with sampajana. What is sampajana? All right, different translations. I think Achan Sumedho, you translate as all-knowing or clear-seeing, or some say clear comprehension. So even our mindfulness must be based on right understanding. Because the sampajana, the word jhana, the second part of the word comes from the word panya. It means wisdom. Because if you only have mindfulness, what's going to happen? You may end up like in the US military, you become a very good sharpshooter. You can shoot your enemy from very far away, very sharpshooter, because you have full concentration, full mindfulness in killing someone. That's mindfulness. You can apply mindfulness in that way. And they teach that in the US military. All right? So we must always balance it with sampajana. All right? And of course the effort. Okay? So we must not take the Buddha's teachings out from its overall context. Then it loses its essential meaning. Okay? So growing in spiritual practice like the rising sun, dispelling the darkness of night. All right? So remember what the Buddha says. The sun is, just as the sun is the forerunner of dawn, so right views, right understanding is a forerunner of our practice. Okay? Progress along the path of practice like mountain streams flowing downhill. Right? Okay? But when once we use the mountains, as an example, because to show we are all part of nature. Deep concentration is like a peaceful pond. All right? I'm sure you're familiar with this book called A Still Forest Pool. The Still Forest Pool, the one where, who was that? Jack Confield and Paul Breiter, right, two ex-monks right, of Chancha, they compile all his teachings. All right. So the essence of it. So how do we have a peace? How do we have a mind as still as a peaceful pond, right? A still forest pool. So the essence of the compilation of teachings is, if you continuously harp on the past, on whatever has happened in the past, all right, and you only anticipate what's going to happen in the future, but you forget about your present moment, then you give yourself, then you will not have peace, you will not have happiness, you will not have peace of mind. Right? So you forget the past, because the past has gone. The future has yet to come. But what is important is the present. Because in Buddhism we say you take care of the present, the future will take care of itself. But you don't take care of the present, you keep on thinking about what's going to happen in the future, you're not going to have peace of mind. Okay? So one of the key essence of the writings in that book called The Still Forest Pool is actually extracted from a very important Buddhist discourse, which some of you may have heard, is called the Bhaddekarata Sutta. Bhaddekarata Sutta, where the Buddha says the past is gone, forget about it. The future is yet to come, forget about it. Live in the present, and then that takes care of everything else. Okay? Just as, for example, our understanding of karma. All right? We are what we were. We are here because of our past karma. Right? Whether you're born short, you're tall, or you're a Chinese, or you're a Indian or Malay, that's your past karma that conditions you. All right? Some people say, I can't do anything about that. But no, your present action, your present karma will determine your future. All right? So that's why you find people who may be born in very poor or miserable situation, they can overcome it through the power of hard work, through the power of persistency, determination. You can overcome it. So that's present karma. So karma is not fate, right? So it's not fate, it's not fatalism, all right? In another sutta the Buddha gave, right? Like even in the Tevijja Sutta, Buddha said, if you think that karma is fate, then there's a wrong view, because you can change your future, and your future is dependent on what you do now. So you can change your present. Okay? So here you can develop a peaceful mind, a peaceful pond. Having insight is likened to looking into a clear, still mountain lake, right? So I'm not sure how many of us have seen a mountain lake. Supposed to be very peaceful, all right? So I think there's a book by Tenzin Palmo. It's called Reflections on a Mountain Lake, right? Yeah, there's a very interesting collection of her writings called Reflections on a Mountain Lake. Okay, so what can we reflect when we look at the mountain lake? It's calm, it's peaceful, it's placid. All right, so there's a lot of good things there. Spiritual maturity is entering the stream, leading to awakening, isn't it? We find in Buddhism we use similes which are very much akin to nature. Like we talk about entering the stream, stream enterer. Isn't it? First stage of enlightenment, first stage of awakening. So the Buddha uses analogies which are akin to nature. So spiritual maturity, like entering the stream. So he says awakening is like the hard wood at the core of a tree. Right? So again, using the simile of a tree. All right? I think Ajahn Buddha Dasa, right? He has got many writings, and his writings always use a simile of hard wood, right? The core, right? Of this. A fully liberated being is like a lotus rising out of muddy water while being unstained by the mud below. As I mentioned to you at the beginning, right? Where did the lotus originate from? It originates in mud, isn't it? Right? Yet we find that in Buddhism, well, in the Pali tradition, we don't use the word Buddha nature. We don't have this concept of Buddha nature, Tata Gata Garbha. We don't have that word. But similarly, in the first, I think the first verse of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says our mind is luminous, prabhasara. So that gives you an indication that actually we can purify our mind, that our resting nature, right? In modern neuroscience, you read books like people like Rick Hanson, Dr. Rick Hanson. He wrote a book called The Buddha's Brain. The Buddha's Brain. There's a book called The Buddha's Brain. I'm not sure how he knows about the Buddha's brain, but the title of his book is called The Buddha's Brain. And the book became such a bestseller that he went on to write another book called Neurodharma. Neuro, that means the Dharma from the mind. Rick Hansen himself is a practicing Buddhist, all right, in the Tibetan tradition. So he also mentioned that he was once asked, if you say that we all have this goodness, we have this so-called Buddha nature, or as we say in the Anguttara Nikaya, this luminous mind, why is it that you find people, like Hitler, you find like during the Cultural Revolution, thousands of people get killed, or Pol Pot in Cambodia, which is not too long. You get people like that who can do such evil things, right? So in the science of psychology, how they analyze our mind is that our mind is have a tendency to always grip on what is negative. So he said that our mind is like Velcro. You know what's a Velcro? Velcro. Maybe you don't wear Velcro shoes, or maybe your kids, they wear Velcro shoes. So our minds is a Velcro for negative things, and a Teflon. You know what's Teflon? When you have non-stick pans. Non-stick pan, you fry eggs. You don't want your eggs to get stuck on the pans, right? So you use a non-stick pan. Non-stick pan has this chemical called Teflon. So according to neuroscientist Rick Hansen, he says our mind have this capacity to attract a lot of negative things. And like Teflon, if it's anything good, we just wash it away. So Buddhist practice is to do the reverse. So that's the whole of Buddhist practice. To turn our mind into a Velcro for positive thoughts, positive deeds, and positive speech. And to be a Teflon for unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome deeds, unwholesome speech. Right? So can we do it? So how do we do it? That's where meditation comes in, mind training comes in. Right? So this Buddhist teachings talks about the mind. All this starts from the mind. Okay? So we can actually be like the lotus. All right? We can be like the lotus. In other words, you can be from, so all unenlightened beings, right? They can become enlightened. You remember when Prince Siddhartha became the Buddha, and initially, the story says that he was a little bit reluctant to teach. And then great Mahabrahma came down and said, "Oh, Buddha, you must teach," for the benefit of those with little dust in their eyes, So, I don't know, we have a lot of dust or very little dust, but those with little dust in their eyes, then they can benefit. So then the Buddha went to teach. In other words, the Buddha knew that, if through study, through practice, they can realize what he has discovered himself. Okay? So in other words, we can be like the lotus. Okay? So that was 2,600 years ago. So the Buddha at that time said, yes, our mind is capable of that. Today, actually, neuroscience, again, using the research from neuroscience, they have coined a word to describe our mind. You know what's that word? That word is called neuroplasticity. So if you understand what this word means, it means that actually our mind is capable of achieving great things. Achieving great things, just that we do not realize it. Right? Or like in our group company's philosophy, we said, all our employees have infinite potential. We always like to say we have infinite potential to grow, to be a leader, to be successful, to achieve whatever you want to achieve. Set your mind to it and you can achieve it. All right? So that's the nature of our mind. We are capable. Similarly, if you don't put your mind on the right track, the mind is also capable of turning into what they call an evil genius, isn't it? So you can use your mind. But ultimately, Buddhists believe that when we are able to develop our mind, then the mind, once at the resting stage, this is just a term which psychologists have used, resting stage. So at the resting stage, then we find that our mind can be pure, but we got to cultivate it, we got to develop it. Okay? So we can be like the lotus. So a fully liberated being is like a lotus rising out of muddy water while being unstained by the mud below. Okay, so I think this is a very powerful of analogy, again referring to lotuses, all right? So nature provides lessons in the impermanence of life, isn't it? You look at the 4 seasons, right? The 4 seasons, right? Everything changed. Right? So because of that, you always have to adapt. You know, recently there were some sociological studies on certain cultures. Why certain cultures are a little bit slow to adapt, and certain cultures are very fast to adapt. So one of the theories is that cultures where they have to adapt to changing seasons, for example, they're very quick. They have to adapt. I suppose in a way you look at like Malaysia, we only have basically 1 season, hot and wet throughout the whole year, right? So you don't have to worry about changing your shirts, your attire. But we are in a temperate land. You have to, right? You can't be coming for a Dhamma talk wearing like this, isn't it? So in cultures like Malaysia, we take it for granted. Whether it's January or December, it's all the same. So, but this is a sociological study. I'm not sure how true that is, right? Okay. So yeah, so we can expect we will change. So nature provides lessons the impermanence of life, and impermanence is one of the core teachings that the Buddha taught about, anicca, isn't it? It's the core teachings. But sometimes people jump on the conclusion that because the Buddha talked about change, then it becomes very negative. It's a very pessimistic, every time we hear about Buddhism, if they're not talking about suffering, they're talking about impermanence. Why can't they talk about something else? Why can't they talk about something that is more pleasing to the ears, So, and I always like to think that, then if they attend the Mahayana talks, they only talk about emptiness, nothing else, emptiness, everything is empty, So what is life? But when I ask this question, they say, once you go to a room, if the room is empty, that means the room is full. Why? Because the room can put in everything that you want to put in. So you can look at it from the positive side, isn't it? If the room is not empty, can you put in the nice sofa? Can you put in the nice furniture? You can't, isn't it? So you have to start with the room being empty, right? So similarly, to think that each time when you hear the word impermanence, immediately your mind, like Rick Hansen said, because your mind is a Velcro for negative things. Buddhism again is about negative things. Why can't you change your mind into something positive? How can impermanence be positive? Do you know impermanence can also be a very positive thing? Bad times don't last, exactly. Is COVID still around? No more already, right? Some people are still around, I don't know. But I think, I don't see anybody wearing masks, or 1, okay, or 2. All right? So wearing masks now is no longer the norm, isn't it? All right? But 3 years ago, we can't even come and sit here. All right? Even when we talk on Zoom or Teams, I still see some people wearing masks on Teams. So we become so used to it. But times have changed. So bad things don't last. Right? Another way of looking at impermanence from a positive angle, His Holiness the Dalai Lama always gives this example, which I find very, very inspiring. He says that if everything doesn't change, how can you improve? That means all your defilements, all your negativities, all your bad thoughts will always be there. But because things are impermanent, so your negative thoughts, your negative action, all this can change. So you can change for the better. So basically you can transform your mind. So you have a choice to be a better person because things change, right? So that's the beauty of change. So we can change our attitude. So in Buddhism, it's always talk about attitude, all right? So this is what in meditation or in Buddhist teachings we call having I'm not sure how you translate this word, yoniso manasikara. How do you translate the word? Yoniso manasikara. Wise attention. Yeah, okay, good. Wise attention. Wise attention. So in other words, whatever you listen, you can actually turn it into something positive, something useful. Right? Even when you look at dukkha, when you hear the word suffering, when you look at the word unsatisfactoriness, then you also can actually turn it into what is the cause of my suffering. If there's a cause, then you can end it. If there's no cause, how are you going to end it? Isn't it? Cause and effect, right? So then you look at the Four Noble Truths in the context of cause and effect. Not just have a Velcro mind that, oh, suffering, that's the end of it. So you see it as a cause and effect, right? Okay, suffering is actually the cause or effect. It's the effect, isn't it? In the Four Noble Truths, suffering is the effect. And what is the cause? Our cravings, which is the second one. And the third one, which is end of suffering, that is the effect. And what is the cause? Eightfold Path. So if you practice the Eightfold Path, that is the cause. It will lead to the result, and the result is the end of suffering. All right? You can use different terms. You can use as nirvana, you can use as enlightenment. Chandram uses the word happiness, which many orthodox say, oh, you cannot, you're changing the Buddha's words. All right. So being in nature can also teach us the importance of living with harmony with nature. In addition, spending time in the wilderness can help us confront our fears and build skills of attention and self-reliance. That's why you have this tradition of forest monks. Right? I think this temple, you're very familiar with that, right? Forest monks. The monks live in the forest. And in Tibet, the monks live, well, Tibet there's no forest, right? So they live in the caves, isn't it? They live in the caves, or in the Himalayas, they live in the caves. So, in other words, within the solitude, right? So to be as part of nature, okay? So whether it's in the wilderness, confront us, you also confront our fears. If you've been to, well, recently I visited a national park, and you know, when you go to a national park, they will always tell you be very careful, right? Because the grizzly bears may just come out and then jump on you. So you got to keep a safe distance, right? But at the same time, I also noticed there are some people who actually are very close. So when I asked the guy who took us around, he said, "Oh, these are the locals. These are actually the local Indians." Because the local Indians, they are so used to living with the grizzly bears, or living with the elks and the moose. So they don't have that fear like we have. So that's the difference, right? It's just the attitude, how we look at things, okay? So when you spend time in the wilderness, well, for example, those monks who stay in the forest, well, they will know there will be poisonous snakes. I'm sure they also know there are tigers, right? But that fear is not there, right? So nature's uncertainty, that's the other thing that we can learn, is that sometimes when a fruit tree is in bloom, a breeze stirs and scatters blossoms to the ground. Some buds remain and grow into a small green fruit. Right? A wind blows, and some of them too, they also fall. Others may become fruit, or nearly ripe, or fully ripe before they fall. So, different stages. Doesn't that remind us of people that we know? Right? So people don't only die of old age, doesn't it? People die when they are young. People also die when they are born. They pass away. Right? People die in his youth, in his infancy. People die, of course, when they get old. So different stages. And I think the late chief used to say, uninvited he came, uninformed he went. Heard of that saying? Uninvited he came. Sometimes, you know, you don't expect a baby to come. Oh, the baby came. Okay, uninvited he came. But uninformed he goes. You do not know when. Right? So the Buddhist saying that just as birth is the backward view of life, of death, so death is a forward view of birth. So when you die, you're reborn. But when you are born, you head towards death. All right? So again, that's nature, isn't it? That's nature, right? So the Buddha says 5 things we should daily contemplate on. Remember the 5 things? The Upajjhatthana Sutta, the Buddha says 5 things. And I think these 5 things, if we contemplate on it, it actually makes us more calm and peaceful, and so that when the inevitable happens, then we are not too affected by it. What are the 5 things? We are of the nature of aging. We will not escape aging. Can anybody escape aging? You can't. No matter how much cream you put on your face, you will eventually still grow old. Aging. Then the other one is sickness. You know, you will, no matter how you try to keep fit, you cannot run away from sickness. Right? Isn't it? What's the third thing? Death. Right? No matter how you try to prolong your life, you will die. What are the other two? The next one is things that you think you always want, you may not necessarily get it. Things that you do not want, you may get it. Well, that's the nature of life. People that you like very much. Right? Sometimes when you remember in your school days, you go to class, you say, "Oh, I wish I could sit next to this good friend of mine." In that, you said to someone that you don't like. Right? You go and stay in a housing estate, you hope you got a good neighbor. Isn't it? Right? In nowadays housing estate, they got this residential association chat groups, right? So this morning I saw a chat group, one neighbor complaining, "My goodness, this neighbor of mine, 6 a.m. he start mowing the lawn, so I cannot even sleep." Right? So you wish that you would not have this neighbor. So it's sometimes quite beyond your control. Those things you can't control. 4 things, right? What is the 5th thing? 5th thing is something you can control. What is the 5th thing? Do you know? You heard of the Upajjhatthana Sutta, right? What is the 5th thing? What is it about? Karma you can control. The first 4 things you cannot control. Can you control? Can you control aging? You can't. Can you control sickness? You can't. Can you control death? you can't. Can you control people that you don't like? You can't. That's why you go to work, got office politics, isn't it? Which company has got no office politics? Every company got office politics. Right? But the 5th one you can control. He says, the 5th one says, we are heirs to our Dharma. We are heirs to our Dharma. And I think in one of Chantani Saro's recent talks, he made this point very clear, that the importance of the 5th point is that we are heirs of our karma. In other words, we can change our karma if we want to. So that's a very positive, very dynamic teaching that the Buddha gave us. You can change your karma, not your past karma. Your past karma is already happened. But at the same time, you can also dilute your past karma. Remember the Lonapala Sutta? Remember? Yeah, you can Google this, Lonapala Sutta. The Buddha says, just as a cup of water, you put a cube of salt. It's very salty, right? But you put the same cup of water with that cube of salt into a big basin of clean water. You taste that water. Would it still be as salty? No. But does it mean that there's no salt there? No, there's salt there. But you don't taste that salt. So similarly, whatever past karma that we have done, say the negative past karma, they are just waiting to ripen. If we have sufficient good karma, we accumulate a lot of good deeds, good actions, good thoughts, good speech, through meditation or through good work, hard work. Buddhists believe that this store of good karma that you have can actually dilute whatever past karma that may ripen. How do we know that? The Buddha explained this in the simile in the Lonapala Sutta, which is called, I think, translated as the salt crystal discourse. Right? So the Buddha explained this, right, that it is possible. Right? But most of the time is what we do now will influence our future. Right? The expression which I think is very important for us to remember is every action have consequences. Every action have consequences. Again, to elaborate, not every action, but every intentional action. Because the Buddha also said, not every action is karma. Intentional action is karma. Nibbedika Sutta. In the Nibbedika Sutta, the Buddha says, Cetana is what makes an action karmic. So we must be very careful with our intention. Whatever we do, whatever we think, and whatever we say. Right? Because karma manifests in 3 doors. Through the mind, through our speech, and through our action. All right? So our intention through our mind, our intention what we want to say, and our intention in what we want to do. So we must be very, very careful about our intention. All right? In some traditions, they use the word motivation. What motivates us to do what we are doing? All right? What is our intention? Okay? So, All right, so it is with people. So like flowers and fruit in the wind, they too fall in different stages in life. That's karma, right? You cannot, and of course, the whole topic on karma, it talks about why people die at different stages of their life, right? You got the first, you got the reproductive karma, you got supportive karma, you got counteractive karma, you got destructive karma. Right? That's topic for another session, right? But karma actually explains a lot of all these things. Well, this is a talk, I think I extracted this in Chancha. He says, some people die while still in the womb, others within only a few days after birth. Some people live for a few years, then die, never having reached maturity. So men and women die in their youth, still others reach to ripe old age before they die. So when reflecting upon people, consider the nature of fruit in the wind. Both are very uncertain. Okay? So I think this is an explanation of that. So how do Buddhists then look at nature? So one of the words we learn is acceptance, right? This means we open our hearts and embrace our life and the world by being at peace with all conditions. Both what is going right and what is going wrong in our lives and the world. Okay? Just now I mentioned to you the Satipatthana Sutta, there are three things, right? Being ardent, being clear comprehension, and then mindful, right? Actually, there's one more. You know, the one more is, in other words, we are prepared to give up clinging to pleasures of the world as well as those unpleasant ones. Right? We're able just to see that this is part and parcel of its existence. All right? So this is the refrain from that discourse, right? If you look at that discourse. So people feel acceptance is passive due to an underlying belief that difficult situations require us to be upset, angry, worried, or fearful in order to motivate us to respond. So acceptance does not mean that we become very passive, right? It does not mean that. It means that we open our hearts and embrace our life and the world by being at peace with all conditions. Because certain things you know that you cannot change. So when you know that you cannot change, what's the point of being angry, being upset, being disappointed about that, right? If you know someone very close to you, or your very loved ones, already at a terminal stage, all right? Well, would being upset, being disappointed, being angry, would it help? It would not help, but instead our attitude change. How we can make he or she, you know, so that they have the best part of his life comfortably, you know, while they're still alive. So we accept it. So in psychology, they use the word radical acceptance. Radical acceptance instead of just accept. Sometimes we use acceptance, people say, oh, you know, you just accept it. It's my fate. I cannot do anything. It's not that. So radical acceptance means that you realize that things are not going to change anymore. You have tried your best, but it's not happening. All right? No point worrying, isn't it? Like Shantideva, his famous saying, remember? When you know that you got a problem and you can solve that problem, why worry? When you know you got a problem and you can't solve that problem, why worry? Because you already done everything, right? So no point worrying about it, right? So we can be concerned about it, but we have no influence. This is the other 2,000 years later, more 1,000 years later, Stephen Covey came up with this phrase: areas of concern, areas of influence. You can be very concerned about what's happening with the killing, people dying in whether in Gaza or Ukraine or in Yemen or in Africa. You can be very concerned about it. But do you have influence? If you can have influence, do something about it. Isn't it? All right? What can we do about it? Okay? So the area of influence is of concern. So certain things we have to understand how it works. How do we change our attitude? Even in the Buddha's teachings, he gave the parable of the two arrows. Have you heard of the parable of the two arrows the Buddha gave? In the Sala Sutta. What is the parable of the two arrows? How many arrows are we shot? We are usually, there are two arrows. Just now I talked to you about the old age, sickness, death. Now, those are the first arrow. Old age, sickness, death. That is the first arrow. What is the second arrow? How we react to that. How we react. You know, the Buddha gave this analogy. If a person is shot by a first arrow, of course he feels the pain. That's a physical pain. The second arrow is his reaction, his attitude to it. So that makes a hell of a change. So that's the second arrow. Okay? So you can read this discourse. It's called the discourse on it. 2 arrows. Salla Sutta. Salla. All right? Okay? So it's not passive in that sense. Okay? So letting go, and well, always like this cartoon. It says that one of the happiest moments in life is when you find the courage to let go of what you can't change. Like Shantideva says, no point worrying about it because you can't change it. All right, you can't change it, isn't it? So lessons from nature, just to summarize, I think there are a couple of things here. One is change, all right, suffering. All right, as I mentioned to you, nature is not always that beautiful, right? You watch National Geographic, you watch YouTube channels about how small animals get eaten up by big animals. You find that living in nature is not that pleasant, all right? Okay, but the difference is, what is our attitude towards it? All right, how do we understand it? There's also a book, very interesting title. It's called Why Zebras Have No Ulcers. Have you heard of the book? Why Zebras? You can Google that. It's a very interesting book. Why Zebras Have No Ulcers. And Achana Maro, in one of his talks, he actually explained that. So you listen to his teachings. I don't have time to explain it. But essentially it says because the attitude of the zebra, they know that they have to look for food, but if they can run away, they'll run away. Sometimes they cannot run fast enough. The lion is going to go after them. So okay, what to do? I still need food. Nobody is going to cook. Nobody is going to offer dana to me. I have to go and look for my food. And to look for the food, occasionally I will get eaten up by the lions. But yeah, I can accept it. It's a flight and fight kind of mode, you see. Right? So if you can have that attitude, then you don't get ulcers. So that's the basis of that book. Right? You read that book. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Right? Okay, it's written by a Stanford biologist. Okay, so suffering and interdependence. Yeah, that's the core of the Buddha's teachings. We are all interrelated. All right, we are all interrelated, isn't it? So. There's a very beautiful analogy in a Chinese sutra called the Hua Yan Jing. Hua Yan Jing is Avatamsaka Sutra. In the sutra, it says that, you imagine in the universe. Imagine in the universe, in the night sky, in the universe, there's a net. Net has got holes, right? So in the eye of each net, you put a jewel. You put a jewel there. And you fill up the net with maybe a few thousand holes, right, with all the jewels, right? So that net you cast in the sky, every net has got a jewel. And when the wind blows, what happens? You see the reflection of the jewels, isn't it? Right? You see the reflection of the jewels. So, in the Avatamsaka Sutra, it says that we are that. Because the nature of our existence, we are all interrelated. We are all interdependent. Right? Thich Nhat Hanh uses another word, interbeing. Interbeing. You may have heard of that from Thich Nhat Hanh. So in the Avatamsaka Sutra, this is called the parable of the net. Right? So it says that even Brahma himself get caught in this net. So even Brahma himself doesn't realize. Only the Buddha understand that because we are all interdependent. Right? So the core Buddhist teachings is about dependent origination, isn't it? Right? Dependent origination. Okay? So when you look at nature, you find that everything is interrelated. Right? For example, the puja book that you have actually is from the tree. Isn't it? It's a wood, right? It's from the wood. So we are all interrelated. If you don't have the wood, you won't have the books. All right? So you have. So because of this, we can do a couple of things. We can learn to have acceptance. Right? Just now we talked about. So again, I don't think I would have done justice by explaining the concept of acceptance. I hope you don't get the impression of acceptance being passive, just giving in. So as I said, there's a word in psychology, we call it radical acceptance. Now, what does that word mean? So you Google that word, it has a Buddhist connotation to that. You know, acceptance is not something you just naively say, oh, I can't do anything, you know, I just accept. That's faith. That's not what is meant by acceptance, yeah? So the other one is, of course, contentment, right? Contentment is when you realize that you have tried your best and you know there's a limit. So that's it, right? But you continue again. If you fail, you keep on continuing. But you reach that level, you tell yourself, okay, I will see what happens, right? So that's contentment, all right? And then forgiveness, right? So he says that we should be like the rocks, like the earth, right? You see, the earth, whether it rains or sun, is always there, right? You forgive. Whether you step on it or what, it doesn't really matter. But again, here, it doesn't mean that you become like a doormat for people to step on. So every word has got what is the word we use? It has got a very subtle differentiation, all right? Even when we practice like loving kindness, all right? So there's the word is a near enemy, all right? Loving kindness, all right? The near enemy of loving kindness is what? What is the near enemy? Is selfish love. Selfish love. Because loving kindness is supposed to be boundless. There's no limit. All right? But selfish love. All right? So even in the Christian tradition, right, they have two terms. You know. One is, I think they call agape. You heard of the word? No, any Christians or ex-Christians who now decide to be a Buddhist? So they have a word called agape. Agape is that kind of universal love, you know, like Christ kind of love. They call it agape. And then there's another kind of love. It's called eros. Eros, erotic love. When your love is to a particular sex, you know, so or a particular person. So they make differentiation between two types of love: erotic love and agape. Eros and agape. So in Buddhism, we talk about metta. All right, I'm not sure what is the Pali word for the selfish love. It could be the word pema, P-E-M-A. I'm not sure, but you can check. Right? Any Pali scholars here? You can check. So there's another word that describes it. So we got to be careful. All right. Just as equanimity, upekkha, right? So equanimity is a very important Buddhist quality, but the near enemy of equanimity is what? Do you know? What is the near enemy of equanimity? And in his book called In This Very Life, U Pandita mentioned very clearly that equanimity is not the same as indifference. Indifference. All right? So if you adopt an apathy or indifferent attitude, that is called a near enemy of equanimity. And I think U Pandita explained it very nicely in his book called In This Very Life. All right, so he makes a difference. So we must be very careful. All right, we practice loving kindness, we practice compassion, we practicing joy, we practice equanimity. So we must be very careful. Each one of you has got what is called a near enemy. Okay? So for equanimity, it is when you adopt an indifferent attitude. Your attitude becomes indifferent. All right? So that's, and gratitude. Be always thankful. All right? So, you know, even in our Pali tradition, in the Chigala Sutta, in the Devadaha Sutta, the Buddha explains that to be born as a human is really very precious. It's very, very rare. It's as rare as that one-eyed turtle that lives at the bottom of the ocean, that comes out to the surface of the ocean maybe once in 100 years, and once in 100 years you have a yolk that floats around in the water, and that this half-blind turtle tries to poke the head into that yolk. So what is the probability of it? Very difficult, isn't it? Right? Maybe some actuaries around, so maybe you can calculate the probability. So here, what the Buddha is saying is that it's very, very rare for us to be born as a human. So we are all born as humans, and all of us have that capacity. We are able to hear, we are able to see, we are able to understand. We should be very grateful we have that opportunities. All right. In fact, yesterday at another Dhamma session, someone was asking me, what is the best way to introduce Buddhism to beginners, especially young children? So I said, well, it depends. But I said, I'm aware in the Tibetan tradition, we start the introduction to children, right, with this teaching of the precious human birth, the beauty of this human birth. And I think that we talk about 10 benefits of why you're born as a human. Right? So we don't start with, all of you suffer. We don't start with that. Right? But we start with, you are a precious human birth. You are very fortunate you're born as a human. You know, so if a young 7-year-old will say, you know, you're a 7-year-old boy, you can do great wonders as a human. You can go to the moon, you know, you can become a Buddha. And then we said, but this human birth, subject to change. You can die anytime. It's like a threat. All right? So slowly it's introduced. So how do you overcome it? Oh, then you must learn to do good things, because every good action have consequences. You do good things, then you'll be reborn in the Tibetan tradition. They talk of 6 realms. They cannot count 31 planes, too many. So 6 realms. So you'll be born in the heavenly realm, you're born in the human realm, you know. So they can. But then slowly, after maybe 2nd, 3rd session, they say, but that is not the final, you know. The final is to get out of the samsara. All right? So it's a very gradual. So that's why it's called lamrim. Lamrim means the graduate path to enlightenment. All right? But some people, they want to have shock therapy, isn't it? Some people must have that. So you start with suffering. Right? So it depends. It depends. So I'm not saying that everybody must use that approach. So it depends, right? Because the Buddha taught for 45 years. It is said that he has got 84,000 Dhamma doors. There are 84,000 Dhamma doors to enter. All right? So we have to choose the right door to enter. Yeah, you choose the wrong door to enter, you cannot come out. All right. So gratitude. So we should be thankful that we are born as a human. Right? Doesn't matter what tradition you follow. You're born as a human. You have the 6 senses intact. You're able to think. You're able to, you know. And we also have got sufficient merits. You know, merits, punya. Punya. We have sufficient merits. If you don't have sufficient merits, I tell you, you don't even have the time. You don't even have the opportunity to sit here and listen to a Dhamma talk. Isn't it? Probably you would have to help your parents to cook noodles to sell, you know, right? In I don't know, in SS2 or whatever, you know. But the fact that you can actually come here, that means you have that merit. Not many people have that, right? Okay? Like yesterday, I went to the, you know, I stay in Ara Damansara. There's a new place, the Ara Damansara. There's so many hawkers. So I went there very early because I had to go for a talk. So I went to buy lunch for my wife. And I said, oh, you just started? He said, no, I started. Oh, I woke up at 4 in the morning, you know, I have to work, you know. And then I have to be here by 7. Oh, I said, oh, good. I said, by afternoon, then you should be back home. No. I said, by end of the month, I'm going to sell Sao Fan. You know, he's from Penang. So I said, oh, good. I'm going to come. So I said, you mean you work in the morning? You woke up at 4, 5 a.m. and then you sell your Penang, what is that, curry mee, you know? And then you rest, you have lunch, you rest for a while. Then evening, you fry Sao Fan. He said, yeah. He said, 冇辦法啦. So there are many people like that, you know. Many people like that, you know. So I think in that sense, we have that opportunity to be here, right? So we should be always grateful for that. In Pali, the word is kata anyu. And in the Mangala Sutta, the 38 blessings, right? One of the blessings is gratitude, to have that gratitude, okay? All right. So I'm going to end by sharing with you a very beautiful poem not by me, of course. This is a poem by a very well-known Tibetan yogi, not Milarepa, all right? This is Shabka. Shabka is one of those rare Tibetan yogis who is a vegetarian. You know? You know, Tibetans are not famous, are not well-known for being vegetarians, right? Because they always say, you know, Tibet cannot grow vegetables. So how to be vegetarian? But Shabka is one of those rare exceptions, right? So this is advice of a mountain flower. So Shabka composed this poem to remind himself that he has to understand the nature of nature, the nature of things. And who is the best person to advise him? A flower, a mountain flower. So here you have Shabka in a very humble, with a lot of humility. He said, I even learned from this mountain flower. Now what is this that he learned? So I just share with you this poem. So, listen to me, mountain dweller. So who said listen to me? The flower said, listen to me, mountain dweller. Mountain dweller is Shabka, the great yogi. He said, listen to me, mountain dweller. I don't want to hurt your feelings. But in fact, you even lack awareness of impermanence and death, let alone any realization of emptiness. You see, in Tibetan Buddhism, you cannot talk about anything other than emptiness. Right? Emptiness is a key teaching of wisdom. So for them, wisdom means realizing emptiness. Right? For those with such awareness, outer phenomena all teach impermanence and death. Outer phenomena, you can see. I, the flower, will now give you, the yogi, a bit of helpful advice on death and impermanence. So this is a flower talking. Huh? A flower born in a meadow. I enjoy perfect happiness with my brightly colored petals in full bloom. That's a beautiful flower, right? Surrounded by an eager cloud of bees. Well, the bees come around, right? I dance gaily, flower, right? She will dance gaily, swaying gently with the wind. When a fine rain falls, my petals wrap around me. When the sun shines, I open like a smile. Right? Right now, I look well enough. That's a flower talking, huh? But I won't last long. Not at all. Unwelcome frost will dull the vivid colors. You got 4 seasons, right? So you got winter. Till turning brown, I wither. Thinking of this, I am disturbed. Later still, winds, violent and merciless, will tear me apart until I turn to dust. You, hermit, are of the same nature. So here the flower. So Shabka has used the analogy of the flower to remind himself. You know, Shabka is using this analogy of the flower to remind himself. Okay, so this is in the 19th century, so it's not that long ago, right? So before that, there are also a lot of great yogis, like there's another called the Songs of Milarepa. So I think these are all very inspiring songs, very inspiring poem. It doesn't make you pessimistic or anything, but it just tells you that's the reality of things. So when you understand that's the reality of things, you look at it in a very different perspective. You want to live every moment, right? I think Jon Kabat-Zinn, you know Jon Kabat-Zinn, the guy who wrote, who first came up with this called MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Techniques, where he secularized mindfulness. He said at the beginning, all of us have what is called a full catastrophe living. We have a full catastrophe. You know, catastrophe? Disaster. Full catastrophe living. It's only through understanding that there is catastrophe in this world that we actually lead a happy and peaceful life. You see? So it's when you realize that there is catastrophe. But if you tell yourself, everything is fine, there's no catastrophe, you will not have peace, you will not have happiness in the long term. So that because when catastrophe hits you, you cannot accept it. Right? But when you accept that full catastrophe living is there, then you can face life easily. Right? Okay? So when John Kabat-Zinn first tried to teach MBSR, he completely kept aside any reference to Buddhism. Because at that stage, he said people won't appreciate it. But today, he sits among Dalai Lamas and Joseph Goldstein and teach as a Buddhist teacher. Because he realized that today the West is ready to accept the Dharma, right? Accept mindfulness and so on. Okay, so I just want to end with this. And so may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. And may all sentient beings be in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. So let us put this into practice.